Happy Friday, everyone. John Lorden here. Welcome to your weekly episode of BrainScratch. Today we're looking back on a topic I've covered previously. That is the case of Colin Madsen. The original episode was called The Cover-Up of Colin Madsen. This episode is called The Analysis of Colin Madsen because we have some forensic information to go over in terms of this, and it might push us into a direction of understanding things much better. And in terms of the question, did he die from freezing in Siberia, possibly after smoking some marijuana, or did something else happen to him? I think we're going to have a much better position to make that determination for ourselves. If you're unfamiliar with this episode, I'll have a link to it in the description box below. I highly recommend that you pause this video, watch that one first, and come back to this one because I'm not going to be filling in all the gaps in this story. But I will start with just a brief review. This is from a newer article at a website called stopfake.org, which seems to be a website dedicated to combating fake news, particularly for the Ukraine. And here we have a very beautiful picture of Colin doing one of the things that he really appreciated doing, and that was appreciating nature. And I'd also like to give a quick shout out to Sarah Hurst for helping to spread the information on this story. I and Colin's mother are a little surprised that major media still hasn't really caught on to this story. And of course, when you're talking something that could be an international dispute, I guess I understand why some of them are shying away, but I'd like to think there's some reporter out there that's willing to really dive into this to help raise the exposure and bring it to a new level. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that reporter will eventually bump into information like we're seeing here at stopfake.org. But Russian authorities say 25-year-old Colin Madsen from Missouri died from hypothermia in Buryatia under the influence of drugs. His mother, Dana Madsen Calcutt, a doctor, is determined to prove that he was murdered and has recently received a forensics report that concludes Colin's death was a homicide. U.S. Embassy officials say they can't acknowledge homicide as the cause of death unless Russia does this, which is unlikely to happen. But Dana is not giving up on finding the truth. And boy, can I attest to that. I've been in contact with Dana pretty much since the first episode aired. She's been doing an amazing job at keeping me updated of all their recent developments. We're going to touch on some of those developments towards the end of this video. I have to tell you, one of the things I appreciate most about doing this type of work is meeting people like Dana and her husband Mick, people that are very dedicated to really changing the world for the better, and even possibly trying to use this case as a platform to help bring awareness to other people about sending your children overseas. We're going to run into some more information on that as we go forward through this as well. They have really pulled me into the fold, guys. I have been given access to everything I've asked for. I literally have seen all the autopsy photos. I have access to the video of the autopsy. I have the original Russian transcript of the autopsy converted to English so I can actually understand it. And of course, these newer reports that just came out. The most recent one came out just this year, in the middle of the year. So they've been doing an amazing job. They've hooped me in with some other people that are helping them out. It's just really amazing to see this team of people that are working on this. And there's almost kind of multiple levels to it. There's the level of wanting to understand the truth, and I firmly believe this is a family that's looking for the truth. There's the level of this circle of people that are supporting them in those efforts. But then there's this other whole side, which is, what do you do with this case? You know, you basically have Russia saying, no, we have our determination. This is essentially what they would consider an accidental death. That's that. You know, our hands are free and clear of this. But now we have some very compelling information that's coming out. But even with that information, where do you go next? And that's really something that I wanted to bring to you guys. That's why this video is going to be a little bit of a different format from a different BrainScratch. I'm just really trying to share with with you guys the interactions that I've had with Dana and Mick over the past several months. I just want to give you some insight into some of their frustration. I literally got off the phone with Dana less than an hour ago. We've talked to each other on the phone a few times, and one of the things she wanted to talk about is just the whole aspect of shame and kind of victim blaming that was going on around this case. The fact that before he was found, press was already reporting, oh, this is a kid that, basically smoked too much weed and went out in the freezing cold and froze to death, and how they matched the police's determination before he was even found. Certainly a brain scratch in itself. How does that happen? I have no idea. So there's a lot of emotions that run around this for me, but of course for the family and all of the team that is involved in terms of trying to help with this. And I really appreciate that they have good support, and they've got some new team members that are hopefully going to be able to help them. Let me just give you one little piece of news. They do now have a human rights attorney hired that is going to try to work within the Russian legal system to see what they could possibly do to get this ruling kind of overturned. And considering the report that we're going to look into today, I'm hoping they have a really good chance at doing that. But I also just want to put the word out there for all of you. Keep it in the back of your mind as you're watching and as we're reviewing this information. What do you guys think we can do to help more? There is a change.org petition. It's already been signed over 112,000 times. So we've got a pretty good amount of people that are showing they're concerned about this case. They want to see something happen in this case in terms of it being reinvestigated in some way. But where do we go from here? That's really the question that I want to put to all you brain scratchers. I told Dana on the phone today, I'm like, I thought about it for months. How do we attack this problem? I was thinking about maybe, do you make like a short video and use some of the photos from the scene of where he was found to just say, hey, look, it's not logical. The conclusion they made isn't logical. Look at this photo, look at this photo, look at this photo. But then what's the call to action? What do we do? I went looking, I found a site called democracy.io where you could basically write to your local representatives. I was thinking about, do we have a form letter somewhere, and we copy that and we ask people to go to that website and shoot it into their local representatives. But it still comes back to who has the power to actually change the understanding of this case, and all of that kind of points back to Russia. So that's the stopgap that I see in it, but I wanted to put it out to you guys because I know we've got a lot of different experience out there in terms of this brain scratch audience. You might have a whole different thought about how to go about this that might be the key that we're looking for. And I know Dana would appreciate that as well. So if you think you have that information, or you've got some ideas on how to try to change how this is all going, please be sure to drop them in the comments down below. It's really important that we get those types of ideas reviewed and talked about here. So I wanted to start by taking a look at travel.state.gov. I just wanted to see what's the word right now in terms of traveling to Russia. If I had a young member of my family that was thinking about going overseas for some type of schooling program, what would I see if I went out there looking for information about traveling to Russia? And right now we have a Russia travel advisory. This was issued June 15th of 2018. And you can see their advisory levels basically go from 1 to 4, and 4 is a just flat out do not go there. Right now for Russia, they have it listed as a 3. To reconsider travel. Reconsider travel to Russia due to terrorism and harassment. Some areas have increased risk. Now, I'm not seeing warnings in particular for Siberia, but it is just kind of talking about Russia in general. One of the things that kind of stuck out to me here is avoid demonstrations. And we know from Colin's story that he participated in some demonstrations and even got a warning letter. Those were demonstrations that were associated with Greenpeace, if I recall correctly. Stay alert in locations frequented by Westerners. It just kind of concerns me a little bit when you hear something like that. Are we saying that those areas are more likely to be targeted for some particular reason? So it's just, it's one of those things. And I believe Dana actually looked into this type of information before Colin even left on his trip there. So just know that there is a website you can come to, travel.state.gov. If you have a loved one of yours that is thinking about doing a program like this, you might want to start here just as the first piece of your research into, is this really a good thing to do or not? Now, over at dailycost.com, there is another article that's been written, and I'm not always the biggest fan of taking a bunch of cases and throwing them together and then trying to look at the trend and say, look, this is proving that, Russia is so corrupt that no one should live there and no one should go there and blah, blah, blah. And does this article kind of attempt to do that? A little bit, but I got to say, it's a pretty compelling read. It really focuses on the last decade in particular of kind of strange deaths going on. They're noticing in particular here that the types of people that were killed were journalists, activists. So it's something that I think more people should be aware of. I looked into, I read every one of these instances, and some of them you kind of wonder, okay, well, is that really a natural death, or do you think something really happened there or not? But just looking at this as an overall trend, some of them you can pick out and say, well, something certainly happened. I mean, there's a man and his wife that run kind of an alternative theater program out there. And I think they were both killed within a month of each other, or died within a month of each other under somewhat suspicious circumstances. So it's a very interesting read, and it was really interesting because in the middle of all these names, Colin Madsen also shows up, and what they've written is American student who had been volunteering for Greenpeace, body found 8 days after he disappeared from a cabin in Siberia early in the morning. So I'm going to have this link in the description box below if you want to check it out for yourselves as well. His name also shows up in another list, and this was sent to me directly. I don't remember if it was Dana or Mick, but one of them sent this to me as well. And we see they have a synopsis of Colin's story here. This is actually an Excel sheet that is tracking all of the student deaths abroad for the year 2016 in particular. And I looked through all this. I think there's about maybe 15 or 16 for the year of 2016 that they've categorized here. And I noticed this website, protectstudentsabroad.org. So I just wanted to let you guys know about this website as well. Protect Students Abroad is basically kind of what I imagine as the first step in trying to combat this problem. And that's really doing the data capture and having one place you can go to and look and say, okay, now we can identify there's some type of problem going on here. And I can tell you, after looking through their lists for the past couple of years, not all of the deaths are anything like we're talking about with Colin's case in particular, where it seems like it is extremely suspicious and it's been miscategorized in some way. Some of these deaths are very straightforward. It is about the risks of traveling the world. There was one instance where, the organization that took the students abroad decided to throw a party, took them to a particular beach, and it was later found out that all the locals know you don't go swimming in that beach because there's so many different currents that all come together. Unfortunately, one student lost his life because he went out in the water, was pulled out. They didn't have the resources to help him. They basically watched him flounder for about 40 minutes before he gave into it. So it's one of those things where I do think this is a very important step. I love that they've put this website together. It was put together by two mothers affected by this directly, Elizabeth and Ross, and you can read about them here and their stories as well. Unfortunately, they lost sons, Thomas and Ravi. And on top of that, they have this section here, if things go wrong. And I would say this is super, super important. I think for anyone considering sending your child abroad for studies, just take a look at this. Just read through it. I know it looks heavy. I mean, it even has a section about the repatriation of remains in particular. But just take a look at the types of things that you might be facing if there is some type of emergency that happens abroad and the types of steps that you'll have to take. I did also just want to touch on what their main mission is, what we want: fatality prevention. We want industry-wide, science-based fatality and injury prevention. They're talking about the fact that students are a unique and vulnerable population, that the human mind is still being wired until your mid-20s, and people of that age have limited experience. So they might not think about that risk of going to that particular beach or going out into that particular water. Students and parents can learn more about the safety record of a car than they can learn about the safety record of a study abroad program. Pre-travel safety instruction is inadequate. Through the science of aggregated data, safer study abroad experiences are possible, and study abroad is a terrific experience, but only if students return safely. And I really like how they hit that at the end there, that study abroad is a terrific experience. That's one of the things that I struggle with when I talk about this story and when I look into Colin's case is it's obvious this is something that he really wanted to do. Just seeing the photos of him out in nature, he really loved that environment. So it's one of those things where it's like, you don't want to tell everyone, hey, none of us should go anywhere and you really shouldn't let your kids do this. But I do think that there is a conversation that needs to be had around researching it, trying to make sure that your loved one that's going is adequately prepared for what they could face there. And that's really tough because you yourself might not have the experience to be able to do that. So I still don't know what the answer to this problem is. I'm thankful that Protect Students Abroad is trying to at least pull the data together so we can analyze it. And from that, hopefully we can start having some developments that help with this. But just talking to Dana and with all the communication I've had with her and Mick, I know how hard this is on a family. The whole international aspect of it just throws this big separation in terms of you feeling like you can actually seek answers, find the justice you're looking for. There's just this wide gap because you're playing on someone else's playing field at this point. You know, you're not dealing with what you know about the law in America. You're dealing with international issues at this point. So Independent Forensic Services is the company that was hired by Colin's family to do some analysis on the autopsy that was conducted in Russia. Now, keep in mind, they did the autopsy in Russia. They came to their conclusion that, it was basically hypothermia. And that he was also using narcotics. According to information that Dana sent me, the level that they found of THC in his system was, I think, just like 1.5 milligrams above the negative result. So it was practically a negative result, very, very close to having a negative result for finding THC in his system. I have no idea to quantify it, to understand, does that mean that he had smoked a week before, a month before? Was it even that day? Does it wear off that quickly? Or because he wasn't found for a number of days after, did that drop the level? I don't know enough about the science of all that. All I can tell you is what was told to me. But Dana is also very clear that when they came back to America, they brought him back to America. They had him prepared basically I believe in Russia. So he was put in a casket. He was redressed. They even had put makeup on him. They were re-preparing him. I think they might have been changing caskets, if I remember correctly, at the mortuary, and they took his makeup off, and that's when they noticed that there was a lot of marks that they couldn't explain. They were changing his clothes, and they noticed there was just bruising all over his legs, bruising all over his arms. Once again, that wasn't explained by the official cause. So there was a second autopsy performed at that point. Now, the person that did that process, the family was not very impressed by. They were giving them information, from the first autopsy and asking them to look into it, asking them if they knew about aspects of the case. And it just seemed like the person that was handling the second autopsy just wasn't really on board. It seems like he was kind of insensitive as well, said some pretty... I don't know how people could be in that position and say the things that he did to the family. I think there was even a complaint filed about him. So there was a second autopsy, but it wasn't done in a way where they were looking specifically for trauma. So regardless, we have 2 autopsies. We have photos all the way through. I mean, basically from where his body is found through both of those autopsy processes. We have videotape in one case of the autopsy. So all that information is given over to independent forensic services. There is a Swiss pathologist, I believe, that is actually taking all this information in and then doing this report. Now, the first report came out in July of 2017, and it's almost what I would consider like a preliminary report. There's another report that comes out about a year later that is what they call a forensic pathological report. So I've got both of them. First, we're going to go through the preliminary report. Now, unfortunately, I can't show it on my screen. There's some personal information on some of the pages, and there are photos all over it, and I kind of debated about this. I have approval from Dana to show whatever photos I believe are worth showing to you guys to help you understand what's going on with this case. We talked about several photos specifically, but I've got this thing where I don't want to expose you guys to too much of this. I can tell you it's pretty heavy when you're looking at these types of photos and you're looking for the truth and you're trying to understand everything and you're reading these reports and then matching what you're reading in the reports up with the photos. I don't know that there's a whole lot of value to me exposing the photos to you guys too much. There are, I believe, 2 photos that I want to show you guys. The first one is where his body was found so that you can understand. And this is a photo that has popped up in a couple of articles already. So I'll bring it up on screen here so you can see it. And there's a couple of interesting things about this photo. The first is the family was told that the terrain was too rough for them to be able to get there. As you can see in the background of this photo, there's a ton of people sitting around there. I've seen other photos looking off in other directions. There is nothing rough about this terrain. In many of the photos, there's horses, there's several people hanging out up there. If I recall correctly, I believe one of his classmates even made a comment about the fact that they went back to where he was found and there was nothing tough about getting back to that area. So, but on top of that, I just wanted you guys to see the position that he's found in up against this tree, which I kind of don't understand. I don't know what he could have been doing up against the tree. I guess it is worth saying that the fly of his pants, it looks like they are Velcro and they were open, but there was 500 cc's that was taken from his bladder during the autopsy. So my first assumption was when I saw him up against the tree, I was like, wow, I wonder if he was going to urinate or if they wanted to make it look like he stopped there to urinate and then somehow froze to death or something along those lines. But knowing that he had that much urine still in his bladder, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. I think that's pretty easy to debate. So I don't know. This is the location he was found in. From looking at a couple of the different photos here, I do wonder if he was kind of dropped there. It doesn't look like there's a lot of thought in terms of how he's placed there. His arms are twisted in a bit of a weird direction. We've got one of his legs kicked out in a strange direction. It doesn't look like a place where he would have fallen naturally. In terms of hypothermia, I mean, honestly, looking at these pictures, the area where he's found is almost completely clear. There's no obstructions that I could see that he could trip on or something along those lines. In terms of the hypothermia aspect, I don't know if this is really something to lean on, but I got to tell you guys, whenever I'm in a position where I get really cold, and I've done a lot of long distance running, and sometimes I'm doing a race or something like that. You're out at some place at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it could be maybe just a hair above freezing. But even in those conditions, the first thing I do is pull my arms into my shirt. I always get my arms into my shirt because it makes a good heat source. It warms up both my arms and my body. What we see with Colin is he's just out in the open. It looks like he hasn't even done anything to really try to protect his hands. He's just got his thermal sweater on. He's got his pants on. His shoes are not laced, which is interesting. He's not wearing socks. And what's really interesting about that was he had surgery on his feet, and there are parts where he has scarring from that, and it is uncomfortable for him to not have socks on because of those scars. So I know we talked about this a bit in the first video. Does that mean that he was going out, just to use the bathroom? Did he just throw his shoes on, didn't really think about lacing them up because it was just a short walk to where he was going to go? I'm not sure if that's the case here, or if we're talking about a situation where he was redressed by someone, and that's something that is certainly being suspected by the family. So as we continue in this report, they actually show some photos of his nose in particular. They're noting that there appears to be lividity on his nose and blanching of the tip of the nose. So you've got the lividity, which is basically the red blood cells accumulating. They accumulate obviously in the direction of gravity. So why they're talking about this in the report is they're suggesting that when he died, he was actually on his face for a period of time. Now, of course, from the picture we saw, he's found face up. His face is kind of turned off to one side, but he's clearly face up. This report is very strongly saying when he died, his face was down, his nose was pressed, and that's why the red blood cells couldn't accumulate there, but they did everywhere else. So it basically looks red around his nose and then very, very white right at the tip of it. They also bring up another very interesting point, and I really debated about showing you guys these photos, but I think I can explain it. His hands were in a clenched position. And once again, we're talking about the lividity. So we're talking about the red blood cells pooling up in the direction of gravity. And what we have is his left hand is in a fist, but you can see that the lividity is all on top. So basically his hand is just red all the way up through here. Now that should have only happened if his arm was placed downward for a period of time after he died. So, but that's not how his body's found. His body's found with him facing up, and that fist in particular facing up. They also opened up his fist, which is another interesting aspect. He was found with his fists closed. They open up his fist, and it very clearly shows the lividity, because you can see the separation between where the lividity stops and where the pressure from his clenched fist has created the white blanching. And of course, if you turn his hand over, there's a picture of it that they show here as well. The other side of his hand, the side that was facing down when he was found, is almost perfectly white. So very strongly indicates that, if nothing else, his body, the way he died is not the same position that his body was found in. And here I'm reading directly from it. The same applies to the right hand. On the crime scene, I think it's kind of interesting they're calling it a crime scene. The right hand was lying palm down, liver to be expected on the palm of the hand. When the hand is opened, there is no liver there. The only explanation for the distribution of the liver is that the body has been moved after death. The victim has died in a different position and has been lying for a prolonged time in that position. This position is not consistent with the position he was found in. This increases the likelihood that he died due to a crime. Now we get into a very interesting aspect, because we know we were originally looking at an 8-day window between when he goes missing and when he is found. Rigor mortis in general is gone after 3 to 4 days. Liver is fixed mostly after 24 hours. In the pathology report, it is mentioned that the rigor has ended and that the liver was fixed. This means that it is very likely the victim has died at least 3 to 4 days before he was found. The fact that no discoloration of the body is seen, nor is there any bloating, skin slippage, or hair loss, indicate that apart from the putrefaction along the venous network, there are no signs of early decomposition. This puts the time since death closer to 5 days instead of 10 days. So basically, the time gap that we're talking about there is pretty much stating that there's no way that he was deceased for the entire 10 days that he was missing. And that would certainly push us to a conclusion that something else is at play here. Was he being held somewhere, detained in some way? The victim was missing for 8 days before he was found. When the weather conditions and temperatures are taken in consideration, it is very unlikely the victim was lying in the forest for 8 days. The possible deposition of insect eggs is visible on some of the pictures. These eggs should have been stored to determine the type of insect, which could have given information about the time of death. But even if this investigation is not possible, much more animal activity could be expected in an 8-day period than what was observed. One would expect massive insect activity and damage by animal activity, not just one single possible maggot in the left ear. Of course, and then they have a photo. And of all the photos that I looked through, I only saw 2 maggots, one from this particular photo, and then one that was on a piece of his clothing. And yeah, certainly seems very strange for me. I think there should be a lot more going on if his body was really out there for the 8 days. I know I said it in the last video when I saw the pictures. It's almost frustrating because from those initial photos, it looks like they just found him. It looks like you just want him to stand up and tell him what happened. And then what's really interesting is they now start getting into analysis about arm injuries, injuries on his legs, and the arm injuries. There's one cut in particular on his left arm that looks like it's at least 8 inches long. Looks like almost some type of really bad scrape that is going along the outside of his left arm, and that's part of their analysis as well. Is it looks like some of these injuries and the placement of them could be defensive wounds. The thing that is really troubling for me is seeing the injuries on his legs. When they pull his pants up, they actually take a photo of him where he was found, but they just rolled his pants up to right above his knee, and both of his legs have really severe bruising. Some of the bruises actually have cuts that are associated with them that you can see, and it just, I don't know, it worries me when I see bruising like that. It looks almost like he could have been struck with something time and time again. I've looked at other photos similar to this of completely different cases. I was trying to find anything that kind of matched. I wanted to see, was this just some type of natural occurrence or something that, just the way that the body's decomposing, or these types of marks going to show up. There is marbling that I've seen in some where you can almost really see the vein network. It really starts becoming prominent. These are not lining up with that, and the analysis is very clear that that's not what's going on here either. They also note a bruise that is found on the front of the neck. They talk about some wounds that appear to have happened to his feet, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because, once again, he's at least got the boots on, even though they're not laced up. I mean, if we assume the story that we're supposed to be buying here, he goes out in the middle of the night with his boots on. He's found 8 days later dead, died of hypothermia. Well, then what happened to his feet? Why does he have all these wounds all over his feet? Really doesn't make sense. And yeah, there's a lot of wounds on the left side of his body. Some of them they look like they're about the size of fists. There's no other way to say it. It's just the right size. It's the right shape. Very, very troubling. And this is a very interesting point. They have a section here called Cause of Death. Tardieu spots on the lungs are mentioned. This could be a sign of asphyxiation and is cause for proper investigation. And they're saying that those spots were actually mentioned back on the Russian autopsy as well. So I've looked into those a little bit, and it seems like it is a very common indicator for when there has been some type of asphyxiation. We don't exactly have ligature marks in this case, but there are other mechanisms for asphyxiation, which we're going to touch on with the next report as well. So they now have a section called Suspicious Circumstances. The body was moved from position after death. They're fairly clear about that. It is unlikely that the victim died on the location where he was found. There are injuries on areas of the body covered by clothing and shoes. I've already touched on it with the shoes, but the same thing with the arms. I mean, he had these sleeves all the way down. It was a full sleeve sweater that he was wearing. So anything that was damaging his arms or scratching him in that way should have showed up on the sweater, should have tore that as well before it was able to tear through his skin. And the clothing is not showing that. What's really interesting is there's one thing that does show up in the clothing that we're going to touch on by the end of this episode, but then we have the reverse. We have something on the clothing, but no wound on him to explain that on the clothing. The injuries all over his body are not explained by running through the woods. One of the main reasons why they're coming to that conclusion is because that bruising that I was talking about that you can see on his legs also occurs on the back of his legs. And one of these reports mentions specifically, it's the bruising on the front you see very frequently with children. You know, they run into anything, basically. They're just knocking their shins all over the place. And elderly people seem to get that type of bruising on the front. But bruising on the back side of your leg of that same nature, very rare and really points to something suspicious going on there. It is very likely the victim was partly naked when the injuries were inflicted. This means that the victim was dressed and moved after dying. The injuries on his hands and wrists indicate that the victim has been held. At the time of death, the victim seemed to clench his hands into fists. The only thing I was wondering about there is, do they notice that with typical hypothermia cases? Is it one of those things where you're just freezing and you're literally balling up your fists because you're so cold and you're shuddering? I haven't found any information on that. Maybe you guys know. If you do, drop it in the comments down below. The bruising on the neck in combination with, I believe it's petechiae, hope I'm saying that properly, in the lungs indicate the possibility of asphyxiation. The time when the victim was missing is not consistent with the signs of time since death. The time since death indicate a period closer to 5 days than to 10 days. According to the information, the victim was wearing a necklace. I know we touched on this in the last episode. The necklace is not visible in the crime scene pictures. It was in the hands of the police afterward because it was given back to the family. The question is where it was during the incident in which he died. Very suspicious that that necklace shows back up and it's not in the photos. Conclusions. The position of the body on the crime scene and the amount of decomposition indicate the victim died somewhere else. The injuries on the body and the tearing of his clothing indicate that the victim was in some sort of fight. We will get to that. There's one significant tear. That's what I'm kind of wait until the end of the video to show you guys. Based on the observations above, there is strong support for the hypothesis that the victim was physically abused and died in the process. There is strong support for the hypothesis that the victim was held for some time before he died and was transported to the location where he was found. The absence of animal and insect activity support a hypothesis that the victim died on another location than in the forest where animals and insects could reach him. An indoor location where there were no animals or insects is a much more likely location where the body has been stored till it was placed in the woods. And they have just a little bit of a disclaimer. The opinions above are based on the materials provided to me. Should any new information be put forward, this could change the results of my opinions. And it's signed by the forensic scientist. So that was the preliminary report. We will now get into the forensic pathological report and see what else we can learn from there. No photos in this one, so I can get the screen share back on. Sorry about that. Forensic pathological report. We can see this is for Colin Madsen. Manner of death, most likely not natural, homicide. Mechanism of death, most likely external mechanical airway obstruction. Cause of death, most likely suffocation. How do we get to that? Let's go through the report here. The first thing that's mentioned here that we didn't get to in the last one is on the backside of the body at the height of the waist/lumbar spine, a big bluish discolored area of the skin compatible with bruising. And later explanations are going to talk about that section could have been bruised by either some type of blunt force or fixation. Basically, if, for example, if I had someone down on the ground and I put my knee square in the middle of their lower back and held them in place there, that could cause this same type of bruise. On top of that, we're getting more explanation about the arms, the hands, multiple bruises on the extension side of the lower leg, on the flexion side of the lower leg. As you can see here in the blunt force section, I mean, we've got multiple notes. I'm not going to go through each one individually, but it's really trying to note every specific instance that happened on his arms, hands, and legs. And here there's even a section about the neck, the head and neck. On the scalp, 2 abrasions with surrounding bruises left of the middle line of the head. And in more description about that, it seems like it's an odd place. It's what they consider above the hat line, which even if someone falls, for you to be able to get a wound literally on top of your head like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a fall in particular, I guess, unless you fall completely upside down. Which, if we look at the area that we're talking about, he was, I mean, it's not like they found him off of a cliff or something like that. Bluish discoloration of the skin on the lower eyelids, abrasions on the left side of the head. They do talk about his ear in particular, and some of the photos really show it. Almost looks like, I don't know if you've ever seen someone that's been punched in the ear, but the ear can bruise really significantly, and it's around the tip. Kind of the top part, and behind it also, which sometimes happens if someone is struck by something in the side of the head like that. And then dried up abrasion-like changes of the skin of the nostrils and the lips. The lips seem to be surrounded by a discoloration of the skin, suspectable for bruising. They talk about the right side of the neck, which we've already touched on. That. So yeah, they're basically noticing 3 major signs of asphyxia. For signs of hypothermia, their analysis is that there's none. Very, very interesting. Possible signs of ligature strangulation, they are saying no, there are no specific findings to support that. But for possible signs of manual strangulation, they're talking about on the front side of the neck, there seems to be at least 2 bruises. And there's skin markings on the front and lateral sides of the neck that they're saying could be bruises. They aren't quite as sure about that. Possible signs of smothering. Remarkable mummification of both nostrils, the tip of the nose free from any mummification, around the lips, a red brownish coloration of the skin expanding to the chin. So their theory certainly seems to be some object was used to smother him, held over his head until he couldn't breathe any longer. Interpretation. The body of Colin Madsen showed no signs of sharp injuries, gunshots, thermal, or sexual injuries. There was no macroscopic and anatomical cause of death. The body showed several blunt injuries on the extremities and the head. So for the conclusions from this report, there are no signs of a natural anatomical cause of death. It talks about the fact that there are no predator injuries. We don't have enough insect life going on around here. There are signs of so-called defensive injuries. The body showed several bruises as a sign of an external blunt impact. So the next bullet point is talking once again about that bruised area on his back, on the lumbar region, and talking about that it could be caused by fixation, by someone essentially holding him down. I think this is a good time for me to show you the other picture that I want to show you guys today. From what I understand, this picture has not been shown anywhere else. Once again, Dana has trusted me, and it's one of those things where this photo in particular really tells me that something is seriously wrong with what's going on here. So let's take a look at that photo together. So this is obviously the back side of Colin. This is after they have turned him over, and we can see it's more than a significant tear to the back of his pants. Now, keep in mind, there's a reason why I showed you the first photo first. This area, it is on a slope, but like I mentioned, we're not around any cliffs. There's nothing to really explain this type of tear. And what concerns me about this photo that I noticed pretty much as soon as I saw it is the bottom of the tear. It is extremely clean. It looks to me, and I'm not a professional, I can't make this call for certain, but it looks to me like the bottom of that tear starts with a sharp edge of some kind, like a razor, a knife, scissors, something. The bottom of that tear is just far too clean in my eyes. And then it appears to me that from there it was ripped, almost like if you cut a hole in some fabric and then got enough space in there to get your thumbs in and pull it apart, or your index finger in there and pulled it apart. And it looks like it's ripped all the way up to where it can't rip anymore, which is where his pants actually gets kind of doubled up because of the waistband fabric that is up there. So I'm very concerned between the analysis that we've heard about the bruise that was found on the lumbar region and his pants being found in this shape, because the pants are not in the right spot to line up with the bruise on the lumbar region, and the rest of him there's no injuries down here. So what would have happened to his pants that would be this traumatic that would not have injured him and his skin right under those pants? It doesn't make a lot of sense. There's something in my gut that makes me wonder if this was some type of intimidation thing. If someone was holding him down and used a knife, like I said, some type of sharp edge to start that tear and then ripped his pants while they were holding him down, something along those lines. I'm actually going to show you guys a third photo. I know I said there'd be two, but here is the third photo. And something else that seems to bother a lot of people that look into this case is his pants actually look almost like they were washed. So here's a photo of the pants, and you can see they do look fairly clean, especially considering that he was supposed to be laying out there for 8 days. So that photo, it's the one that sticks in my mind the most in terms of proving in my mind that there's some intervention, that someone did something at some point to him after he left his room. I do not think that he would have had pants ripped like that and decided, hey, I have to go out in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I'm going to throw those pants on that have the 12 or 13 inch rip down the back of them. It does not make sense. The location where he's found doesn't make sense for the pants to have ripped. It's not like he was tumbling down some kind of drastic rocky hill or something along those lines where he got to where he landed. It's sloped, but it's pretty lamely sloped. It's not even a very strong slope. And even outside of that, if you just look at the photos of what's around them, I don't know what could tear his pants in that matter. It seems like a significant amount of force that would do that. And once again, if it's something that happened naturally, there should be some accompanying wound to him. I mean, think of what would be that sharp to start that tear like that and then have enough force to go all the way up to the waistband. But somehow his skin underneath that, there's no damage to at all. It really, really doesn't make sense. So how does the report conclude? Kind of like it started. Cause of death, most likely suffocation. Mechanism of death, most likely external mechanical airway obstruction. Manner of death, most likely non-natural cause, homicide. Advice, the information provided showed no signs of a so-called autopsy of the limbs and back. For further support for the above mentioned diagnoses, an autopsy of the limbs is advised to be done. There is still a chance to retrieve macro and microscopical findings to support or negate the preliminary findings. And then it just gets into their final determination, which once again has almost the same type of disclaimer. So, of course, something that's being theorized is the possibility that he could have been taken by some authorities at some level, local police or something along those lines. Is there any information to support that? We do have an issue that has come up. This actually occurred just about 3 months after Colin's death. This is an article from July 31st, 2018. We can see the title is Case of 17-year-old Nikita Kobalev's Death at Police Station Classified. Let's learn just a little bit more about this case. On Tuesday, the Supreme Court of Buryatia held a preliminary hearing on the case of 17-year-old Nikita Kobalev, who died after being detained and interrogated by the police. After the coverage of Nikita's story happened on a program called Let Them Talk, the case was classified. I can't believe how ironic that one sentence is, that they would feature it on a show called Let Them Talk, and then all of a sudden the case would become classified. Nikita Kobylev was suspected of stealing bicycles along with his 18-year-old friend. During the interrogation at the police department, he was beaten up and died. As of now, 4 policemen of Buryatia are accused of abuse of power with the use of violence and special means. So what's interesting is in this case, at least it's being reviewed, and at least it looks like there might be some type of justice that could happen around this one. With Colin's case, we don't necessarily have that, and it's really a shame. I was talking to Dana about it earlier today, and I said it's so strange to me that we had someone like Colin that appreciated that culture so much, learned their language so well, wanted to go there and spend all this time in Russia. And it's almost like he would be the perfect thing that we needed right now in terms of helping this case. Someone that acted as a bridge between these two cultures and understanding how these two cultures work. And it seems like he really wanted to do this. Dana even told me that she was pretty sure that he was going to go into government studies, that he would have been a great diplomat. It's just, it really hurts that we lost, because I say that sometimes on this channel. This is one of those cases where the world could really benefit from someone like Colin being around, and it's a shame that he's not here for that. So this is where I turn it over to you guys. And remember, I asked you that question at the start. Where do we go from here? Is there anything that you guys can think of that we can do to help Dana and Mick, to help them push this forward in any way? I know that they're racking their brain. I know they're trying everything they can. They've written letters every which way they could. Is there something else that we can do? What level would that be at? Are we talking the State Department? She mentioned the possibility, is there an ex-ambassador out there that's willing to help us? Something along those lines. Do you guys have some ideas? Please drop those in the comments below. And before I sign off, I just want to give a very big thank you to Dana and Mick for bringing me in to their inner circle with this story, for sharing all of their information, for being so available. I mean, I literally just picked up the phone, and within a minute I'm talking to Dana and able to get questions answered. It's really tough, because I don't like that these situations happen, but the benefit for me is that I get to meet some very extraordinary people, and I definitely put them in that category. And I just want to thank them for supporting my efforts on all this too. And I'm thankful that they recognized that I was here to try to help them. So thank you guys, because without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do any of this. I really appreciate you that's watching this right now. Please be sure to share this story. We need all the exposure we can get to it. I'm still keeping my fingers crossed. Some big publication, some mainstream media source needs to see this, needs to pick this up, needs to run with this. Let's get some resources in terms of trying to help turn this thing around. Maybe you know someone that's in that area and you can send this to them as well. I'd really appreciate that. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you back here on Monday with a brand new Case Crack.